People all over the world are living longer, often healthier lives. But that comes with social and economic implications, the triumphs and the challenges of an aging world. This is Inside Story. Hello everyone, I'm Kamal Santamaria. Without stating the obvious, we all get older. But it's the rate at which we're now aging that is the concern and the topic of our show today. Because on the one hand, planet Earth's burgeoning population is a crowning achievement of the past century. Thanks to medical advancements, we quite obviously can live longer. But with birth rates falling and workforces too, it's all altering the global social dynamics and raising questions about what we should be doing now to plan for the future. Have a look at this. Population growth, billion by billion, and you'll start to get an idea of what we're talking about. In 1804, the world's population reached 1 billion. But think about that. It had taken all of human history up until that point just to reach 1 billion. The 2 billion mark was achieved in a little over 120 years, 1927 that was. Then it's 1960 where we saw 3 billion. 1974 was when we reached 4 billion. So you see already the gap is getting smaller and smaller. 5 billion was just 13 years later. That was 1987. 6 billion was 1999. And right now we're at 7.29 billion people. That is predicted to hit 8 billion by 2024. And you know, just by the time this program finishes, there'll be about another 4,000 people in this world. But that actually doesn't give us the complete picture. We need to look at the growing proportion of older people on the planet to see the issue here. You go back to 1950, only 8% of the world population was over 60 years old. Today, that number is around 12%. And in just 35 years, that number will almost double. In fact, by 2050, we're looking at 22% of the world population, which is expected to be over 60. So there are some big issues to talk about, and we've got three experts to do that with today. Here they are. We'll start over in London with Toby Porter. He is the CEO of Help Age International, which publishes an index on the social and economic well-being of older people. In Riyadh, Patrick Dixon is the chairman of the trends forecasting company Global Change Limited. Welcome to you. And also in London, Michael Murphy, a professor of demography at the London School of Economics. Gentlemen, a pleasure to have you on Inside Story. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to try to break this discussion down into chunks because there's obviously a lot we can talk about, and I'm going to talk about the workforce, going to talk about pensions, going to talk about healthcare, but I actually want to start with the positive. And this was the first thing I mentioned in the program. Michael, I might put this to you. More older people at this rate means we're doing something right. Humanity is in the right direction. We are extending lives, and that should be viewed in some respects, Michael, as a good thing.
Absolutely. It's probably the greatest achievement of humanity to have this doubling of life expectancy, for example, in developed countries over the 20th century. I mean, it's an amazing achievement, and we're very welcome to be able to deal with it. Two parts of the world didn't do very well in recent years. They were Sub-Saharan Africa with HIV/AIDS, where mortality deteriorated, and in the breakup of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, again, mortality. Those were not good examples of the reverse of mortality improvement. So it's a great achievement.
It is. Patrick Dixon, let me bring you in from Riyadh. With all these extra people, I shouldn't say extra people, they are the people of this world, but with a lot more older people, we've got to learn to manage it, obviously. So I'm going to start with the issue of the workforce. What is the answer when your population of working age people is falling? There are any number of avenues you can go down. What do you think is the most effective or most pertinent?
Well, let's be clear, we're talking about some different worlds here. So,
Sure.
For example, I'm in Saudi Arabia lecturing today in a very young society where around half the population are under the age of 27 to 28 years old. I've recently been in Italy, in Italy there will be 1 million people over the age of 90 in 11 years' time. That's enough people over the age of 90 to change every election. So we are talking different worlds. It's the difference between China and India, for example. China, an older society because people have been having few babies. India, a very young society. So when you look at the contrast between these countries, and you can see a real crisis developing, and you're absolutely right to be covering this. I think that the first thing we need to recognize is this. People aren't just getting older, they're getting older and staying healthier for longer. So, for example, my grandmother retired at the age of 65, but she was still working as a physician at the age of 82.
Wow.
That was 25 years ago. You know, so now just to put that into proportion, 4 generations further on, my daughter is 31 years old. She's qualified as a doctor. Life expectancy has increased. So I would expect my daughter to retire at the age of 75, maybe 80, officially, but unofficially, you know what, she still works part-time and she's really enjoying being a doctor into her 103rd birthday. Now, to the viewers of this program, they may seem shocking, undesirable, disastrous, but it's just the fact that, you know what, during the last hour, almost everyone watching this program has had their own personal life expectancy improved by an average of about 15 minutes. That's 1 year every 4 years. It's 1 decade every 4 decades. That's without any spectacular medical advances. That's just with better diet, people not smoking, taking a little bit more care about themselves. But you start thinking about the huge advances that we will see in biotechnology and healthcare over the next 35 to 40 years. And you can see that why it is that I'm saying that, well, some people may say, oh, doom and gloom, disaster, how are we going to look after all these old people who are going to be, mentally feeble for 50 years on ventilators or something? That's not going to happen.
Okay, but
what we're going to see is a much more agile and mentally fit population that are keen to work to a large extent.
Okay, keen to work, that's good. But Toby, I'm going to bring you into the conversation in a second. I just want one more thing with Patrick. The but I was saying was that if all these people are going to work longer, then, okay, do we have to raise the retirement age? Do we have to change our work
retirement age.
Or just change our workplace thinking then? Change our workplace thinking.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, retirement age is such a last-century concept. You try telling my grandmother 25 years ago she had to retire at the age of 65. The fact is that people can't afford to retire anyway at the age of 65. Why is that? Or even 60. Why is that? Because at the age of 65, many people will have 25 to 30 years of life ahead. At 25 years ago, people retired, say, at the age of 65 in my country, but most of them were dead 4 years later. So we need to completely rethink at the stages of life. I talk about first life starting at 30 years. That's the age when often most people these days settle down and have a family. 30 years to 65 are first lifers. Second lifers are those from 65 to 100 years. That's the life people didn't expect to have. And then old people, well, they're over the age of 100. Now that's the future.
Wow, I think we ought to meet your grandmother for a start. Should have had her on the show. Toby Porter, let me bring you into the conversation here. Patrick's saying that, at the quote-unquote retirement age, that people are actually going to have another 25 or 30 years left. How do we, again, and I'm going to go back to the point about changing workplace attitudes and making it work for an older generation?
Well, I love Patrick's optimism. I love his positivity. And in fact, one of the most important things is that population ageing takes place amidst positive rather than negative views about older people and older age. There is still a lot of negative attitudes out there. We feel that older people still are a sort of largely discriminated group out there. You see it in the media. Every day you pick up a story about age quake, silver tsunami, older people time bomb, all these negative images. But and I think it's really important that voices like Patrick's are heard in terms of talking about the positivity of population ageing and how are we going to adapt to meet this happy, wonderful reality of longer, healthier lives. But what I would like to just remind your listeners is that population ageing is a global phenomenon, not just a rich country, developed world phenomenon. And in many poorer countries, you've already mentioned China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, places in Latin America, places in Eastern Europe, you have populations getting older very quickly where there isn't the same employment opportunities for the population as a whole, where there isn't the same social security relationship between individual and state. And there the narrative isn't so easy to talk about adaptation. How do we adapt working practices? How do we adapt social security benefits? How do we tinker with retirement ages? The real challenges are in those countries that are getting older, if you like, before they got rich. And I think that that's where HelpAge International, which my organisation focuses squarely on older people in lower and middle income contexts, and there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done by the governments and businesses and the populations in those countries.
Michael Murphy, you've been listening intently to everything the other two gentlemen have had to say. Have you got anything you'd like to comment on what they've said?
Yes, I think so. First of all, much of this discussion has been about, if I might call it, individual ageing, about longevity. Population ageing is normally discussed in terms of the ratio of older to younger people, and therefore one's also got to think about what's happening in the workforce and indeed fertility. Fertility decline has been the main driver of population ageing, not mortality improvement. So, I mean, one needs to look at that. I think it's also the case that in many developing countries and in many sort of poorer people, the idea of working till 75 isn't an option. People talk about retirement age, but I think more priority has to be given to the lead up to that. Very high fractions of people never reach the nominal retirement age in countries because they're incapable of doing so. The WHO tends to use 60 as the sort of artificial barrier because they, in their view, in third world countries, people are really not able to continue working at full pace beyond that sort of age. So I think there are two groups, and inequalities may actually start to persist into old age unless we start to take account of what's happening much earlier before one gets to these sorts of ages.
All right, gentlemen, let's just pause for a second here because I want to show something to our viewers. It's a map which gives us a bit more global perspective and brings into play the speed at which countries are aging. It is the Global Age Watch Index, and it shows in 2014, as you see, the United States, Europe and Australia had the highest proportion of older populations, but it's Japan which is by far the highest. More than 30% of the population there is over the age of 60. Watch as it changes over here. This is the projection for 2050, and as you see, things will only get worse for European countries, also for Asia, particularly China, which the gentlemen have talked about. That'll see a rapid ageing of its population. It is right in the middle there, though. The green countries, Africa, the only place in the world that will continue to have less than 10% of its population over the age of 60. So this confirms what you three gentlemen have told us, that it is very different all over the world. I want to bring up the Japan example here. Patrick, I'll do that with you. Japan is famously dealing with this now. Now, what is it doing right, in your opinion? And are there things which Japan is doing which we can all sort of look to the future and go, OK, yes, do this, no, don't do this, to safeguard our future elsewhere?
Well, you're right. It's the speed of change which is the problem. And obviously, to make an extreme example, if you have a country like Japan, and I have to say South Korea is another example, Poland, Spain, Portugal, Italy, these are all examples. You know, there are many countries in the world where you need 8 great-grandparents to produce a single great-grandchild. Just think about it. Because on average, each couple's only having around 1 child. Now, if that happens, then a country becomes extinct. That is the mathematical fact. Your population will halve in every period of time. You go from 8 to 4 to 2 to 1. So yeah, there are very clear solutions which governments can take, but they're not necessarily popular. The first is this. You either have to make more babies, or you have to import them, and you import them as immigrants. Now, and if you think about the UK was on course to become slowly extinct on current trends because we were not having enough children to replace our population. And that's why in our country there have been 2 policies on immigration. Immigration is very much in the news at the moment all over the world. The official one has been keep them out. The unofficial one was don't even count them when they come in. Why? Because actually the UK is now a growing country primarily because of immigration. And that is a pressure for Japan. Japan cannot survive as it currently is without either making more babies or importing a lot. Culturally, importing a lot of immigrants is I think some nations find that easier than others. I think Japan may find that more difficult on a large scale than other nations, but they are relaxing their immigration rules right now because they recognize they need more labor. And I think we're also going to start seeing government initiatives telling people that it is almost their moral duty for the survival and health and well-being of the country to reproduce, to settle down, form relationships and produce children. And we're seeing that policy in Russia. Russia has realized that a falling population is an issue of national security. France has likewise started producing much larger benefits, and people have started having more babies. These are really big issues. Governments need to address them with policy, and actually these things do change because you have, as immigrants come in, they often bring the desire to have larger families with them and so on.
Michael, what's that wry smile on your face for I saw over there while Patrick was talking?
I think both of these are essentially Ponzi schemes. If you say you need to bring in immigrants, firstly, why do you need it for keep your population size up, or do you need to keep your population distribution? Now, those are two very different concepts. Yes, you can bring in migrants, or you can increase fertility, and that will increase the numbers of people. However, if this is population aging, which is this is the ratio of young to old people, you bring in migrants as workers, they improve the balance between retired people and working age people, but they become retired. You have to bring in even more people then to redress that balance. So it's a short-term fix, but you have to pay back in time, and so that's why it's not a long-term.
I mean,
I think, frankly.
Go on, Patrick.
But even if it's short-term, I mean, to be honest, you buy 20 years, and let's look what's happened in the UK. You bring in, let's say, when we opened the doors, people like Poland came into the European Union. We saw 1 million people from Poland come into the UK, almost all of them under the age of 30, and very welcome they were too. We've seen a huge number of the workforce, a younger workforce replenished, the numbers replenished as a result of that. Now, it's true a lot of them have gone back. It's true a lot of them will get older. But in the meantime, other things are happening. So, for example, you get a generation of people in my country, in the UK, who were 25 years old. They're women who decided not to have babies because they wanted careers, many of them. They've got to 30 years old, not having babies. 35 years old, not having babies. Now there's a panic. And we're seeing a whole load of 38, 39 and 40-year-olds who are decided to have families. We're seeing the same thing happen in a number of other European countries. So it's a very complex picture as each generation takes its own view about its own fertility. So you can see, and in fact, right now in the UK, we have a population boom. We are struggling to build enough schools, enough clinics to deliver babies, enough antenatal wards because these things go in cycles. So it's not quite right to say, oh, Italy is doom and gloom and it will become extinct, or Japan the same. These things are cyclical, and there are big things that governments can do. But here is a big paradox. We have 1 billion children alive today, more children than ever that have been alive in all of human history, and all of them want your lifestyle that they see on this program. And where are they going to find it? Many of them are in Africa, others in India. They are wide open to come and work in Japan, South Korea, in Italy, in Germany, in all these old countries. So you have lots and lots of children. We are not short of children or young people in the world. We have lots and lots of countries that have stopped making babies that ought to welcome them. Now, in that is a big cultural issue, but it's not actually a long-term economic one.
Gentlemen, I'm conscious that poor old Toby's over there in London and we haven't shot a question to him in a little while, so let me come to you, Toby, because you were earlier very positive about the idea of an older workforce, people who can work, people who will want to work in the future. There's two problems I can see, and these are the other two issues I wanted to cover off. That is pensions and that is healthcare. The more older people you have, the more older people you have working, the more stress there is on both of those systems. Am I right?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think let me try and get a couple of points across. I mean, to go back again to most, I think so far our discussion in terms of the workforce, we've tended to assume, without stating it, that we're talking about people in the formal employment sector. But actually, in Asia, in Africa, what you're seeing is that the average age of the farming population is rising even faster than the population as a whole. So the typical pattern in China, for example, is that younger people have moved to the cities. You have couples perhaps having one child, trying to pay off a loan for a very expensive apartment in a sort of Chinese megacity, and they might have 4 parents living in rural areas. Chinese government's actually just published a law making it obligatory for adults to visit their elderly parents at least once or twice a year. In terms of this is how foxed policymakers are, that people just don't know what to do about these demographic realities. But on healthcare, I think everybody understands that already the very sort of medicalized healthcare system, the system whereby the financing of the healthcare system is based along procedures rather than outcomes, that is not the sort of healthcare models that developing countries can afford to mimic and replicate for their populations. And I think that all of us in the developed world, in the fast developing world, we have to focus much more on healthy lifestyles, on healthy outcomes, on health systems that really concentrate resources in community level at primary healthcare systems and try and not have sort of tertiary healthcare centres like hospitals act as magnets to bring people into their centres for the most expensive forms of treatment.
And Toby, what about
pensions?
Sorry, if I can just interrupt you there, just so we can keep going there. You know, I host an economics program, so I'm always interested in this sort of thing. You know, you've got fewer workers paying into state pensions. You've got interest rates are low, so you know generally saving levels are going to go down. How do we counter that? Is it about a change of thinking? Get people saving earlier. Think about you might have to work longer. You're going to need some more money later in life?
Well, I think that message has to go across. I mean, you know, whatever the solution is, obviously business as usual isn't it. And I think that people do have to, you know, the governments and businesses and society as a whole has to engage in a positive narrative about population ageing and longer lives as part of that. Process. But I think in terms of pensions, again, you're looking at very different systems. In the West, we're talking about, okay, should we raise retirement age from 65 to 67, and might we phase that in 15 years' time? In fact, so far the policies that have been floated on pension reform in most developed countries actually fall far short of what's needed. But again, what do you do in developing countries where a basic pension for an older person might be all the income that an older man or an older woman has? And I think in this case, certainly something Help Age International believes very passionately is governments should think about providing universal pensions. Again, in China in 2009, the Chinese government introduced legislation that at a single shot, if you like, gave 130 million pensioners. That was 19% of the global population of over 60-year-olds received a pension for the first time because the government was in a position to do it. The prejudice against older people often manifests itself, oh no, we can't afford pensions, we've got to focus on schools and everything else, but it's not expensive. In Burkina Faso, we've estimated it would be 0.4% of GDP. In somewhere like Kenya, it would be about 1.2% to get a universal pension. So, it's absolutely critical, and the benefits spread across families.
So it seems to me, Michael, I'll put this to you, it seems to me that from what we're all saying here, the quote-unquote developing world, or emerging countries, or whatever you want to call them, have got a great opportunity here to learn from mistakes made by the quote-unquote developed world and come up with a better system that will keep everyone in good health, in good finances, and even keep them working.
Absolutely. As everyone's pointed out, you've got to start early to get the real benefits. That's in terms of things like savings, but also in terms of health maintenance. So to the extent people take that on board, and I'm afraid we've known these. We've known smoking's bad for you for 50 years, but smoking still carries on. So there is a problem in translating what everyone accepts into the real world. And I think what you've got to have ultimately is enough confidence in the institutions for people to feel that if they put their savings into some, whatever, either a government or some other agency, that they will be around in 50 years' time when they come to draw on that. And I think governance really comes as a lot of development economics, it's the institutions that matter as well as the economics. And therefore, a priority needs to be given to building up the confidence in the ability of those institutions to regain the confidence of their users over time.
Gentlemen, it's been great talking to you. A really positive conversation is what I've liked today. So thanks to all of you. Toby Porter there in London, Patrick Dixon is in Riyadh, and we've also got Michael Murphy who joined us from London. Gentlemen, thank you to all three of you. And thank you, our viewers, for joining us for this edition of Inside Story. If you've got anything to add to today's show, lots of ways you can join in the conversation. Head online, go to the programmes page, first of all, at aljazeera.com, and you can visit the Inside Story page to watch this episode again or look at previous episodes. You can hop on your social media platform of choice, post on comments at Facebook even, .com/AJ Inside Story, tweets to @AJ Inside Story as well, or to me @KamalAJE. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for your company, and we'll see you again soon.